welcome back to Fish the Mark. Appreciate you dropping in on the channel. Please feel free to provide comments and thoughts on what you like and what you'd like to see us do in the future. The last video that I published was all about how my year started off rough with some just terrible luck on my part and some mistakes on my part. This video, I want to talk about fishing right after ice out conditions. So fishing a strip mine lake in central Illinois on March 6th, which was a Sunday. On Saturday the 5th, the lake was covered in ice. And we had a warm rain that night, Saturday night. And by Sunday mid-morning, about 95% of the ice was off the lake. So I decided to go fishing and thought I would share some of what I learned that day on the lake and verified in my mind on the lake that day. So it was ended up being a good day. Just fished for a couple hours, caught 5 decent fish in that process. And 4 of them were on crankbaits and 1 of them was on a jig. And so thought we would just kind of go through and talk a little bit about what I learned and what happened that day. So let's start by taking a look at kind of what the weather started like and what it ended like that day. So this is right there is where I put the boat in on this lake. And so, just a few minutes after I put the boat in, I had this picture taken. It was sunny, fairly warm. It was probably 55 degrees when I put the boat in the water, and had good sun. The wind was coming over that hill, so it was protected a little bit, but there was a decent amount of wind blowing that day. And the north end of the lake, which is where I caught all the fish out of. I mean, this was a classic ice out condition, early spring condition. The north end of the lake is supposed to be the warmest end of the lake during early spring. As the sun comes from the south, it shines on the north end and that warms up first. And that's where the ice left first. And the north end was about 2 degrees warmer than the south wind was, or south side of the lake was on this particular day. And all the fish I caught were on the north end. Now, it helped that when I was fishing the north end, the sun was out. When I got to the south end, there were 2 things that were really deterrent to the fish. One of them is the cloud cover moved in and really brought the temperature of the air down quite a bit. And 2, there was still ice on the south end, as you can see here. And the temperature dropped enough. I put a jacket on because I got cold. And Bella started curling up a little bit because it was cold. But then we even got to the south end and there was still ice on the lake. And so it's no wonder that everything was caught on the north end, which is a classic early spring pattern, is fish the north end of the lake and the water should be warmer and the fish should be more active. And that's exactly what happened on this particular day. And so we'll focus on what happened on the north end and how we caught the fish. I find it interesting that we're less than 24 hours out of ice out and the water was already 46 degrees. Even by the ice here, the water was like 43 degrees. So, once that ice gets off, the lake starts turning over. This is a deep strip mine lake. It's clear. It takes a while to warm up. The deepest spot in this lake is 40 feet. Yet it was already 46 degrees on the warm end and 43 on the cool end. And so it didn't take long after ice out to get to decent temperatures. Jumping back to here, I think we'll take a look at the first 2 fish catches from the day. Actually, we're going to pick up pretty close to this spot on the video for the first fish catch. Both of the first 2 were caught on a 5XD crankbait by Strike King. I was fishing it over about 20 feet of water. The crankbait was getting down to about 15 feet and the fish were coming up and tagging it. Now, one of the other things that was interesting about the day is that they were active and they were chasing these things down. In fact, on the first fish, you'll see I got a hit, set the hook. He didn't get it, but came back 2 or 3 cranks later and grabbed it. And so, it was interesting to see that soon after ice out, how aggressive the fish were and how they were going after crankbaits. So let's take a look at those first two fish catches.
It's too big the boat. Ooh. No.
So that first fish ended up being 17 3/4 inches. The second fish ended up being over 18. I think it was 18 and a half. And so a couple nice fish, both in the first 10 minutes of the day being out there. Felt pretty good about where things were at that point, and really thought I had the pattern right at that point. Came up on this little point. So it started over here on this corner of the lake and had worked my way around. That second fish was caught right about here. And came up to this little point, and this little point here, you know, it's a deep lake, so the point's even deep, right? It's just not as deep as the rest of the lake. Strip mine lakes are often really deep, and this is no exception. And so even though I'm this close to shore, the boat's sitting in 10, 12 feet of water. But if I'm this close to shore up here, I'm in 15, 18 feet of water. So it is, you know, about half as deep, even though it's still pretty deep. I know that this point right here has a variety of down timbers and Christmas trees on it. And so I worked over the top of those with that crankbait and didn't get a hit. But there's almost always fish around the timber and Christmas trees on this point. So I decided to set the boat around in a different angle, and I grabbed a jig and drug it through those trees, and ended up catching this fish, dragging this jig through the trees. So that fish ended up being right around 19 inches and about 4 pounds. So that was the good fish of the day right there. And I'm, you know, 45 minutes into the day, and I've got a 17 and a half, like an 18 and a half, and a 19. Feeling pretty good about how things are going. I start working my way around the bank some more, and you can see it's starting to cloud up just a little bit as I go. And I pick up that crankbait again, and I catch 2 more fish on the crankbait. And so we're going to take a look at those 2 catches in a second. The first one that you're going to see, it was, to me, it's an interesting watch. It's something I'm going to do a video on later this summer. But I was throwing that crankbait, and it hit and got caught a little bit in some grass that was still alive over the winter. And so I snapped the rod hard twice, and that freed it up and got the grass off of the lure. And then the bass came and struck it after that. And that's a really common technique that I do in lakes that have grass with crankbaits. I crank the crankbait into the grass. When it hits it, I snap it real hard 2 or 3 times. And what's one of the nice things about the 5XD is that it responds really well to that. It's got a good motion when it comes off, and it shakes off the grass that it gets on it really well. You don't come back with a lot of grass on it when you snap it many times. And so you'll see me do that on this first fish over here on the left. It ends up being, you know, a 14.5-inch fish. And then while I was fighting that fish in, I spot locked the boat with the wind. The boat swung around a little bit. And then the very next cast after I release that fish, I catch another one in the exact same spot. Threw it up there. I didn't tick the grass this time, but shortly after where I ticked the grass, I caught another fish. And so the fish still had a little bit of schooling from the wintertime going on. I caught these 2 on back-to-back casts. And so it ended up being really interesting to see these 2 fish back-to-back, seeing the one hit after I snapped it out of the grass, and then throw right back in there and catch another one that was about the same size, to see the fish still schooling in the fall or early spring here, even though the ice out had happened. And so let's take a look at those 2 fish catches.
There we go. Four.
So, you know, to summarize the day, we ended up with, you know, in the first hour and 15 minutes, 5 fish, 2 in the 14-inch range, 1 17.75, 1 18.5, 1 about 19. So that's, you know, that's a pretty good hour and 15 minutes it took place, and was real happy with that. I ended up, instead of staying on the north end of the lake and just working that over, I ended up moving to the south end of the lake just to see what it was like, and it was just dead. There was nothing down there. So I showed you the ice earlier. I should have stayed up on the north end where it was warm, and kept working those fish. At the same time, I moved to the south end. The cloud cover kept moving in. The wind picked up. They got cold. I don't think that helped the fishing any either on the south end, because it didn't have the warm sun to get the fish going either. So, you know, a couple of lessons learned for me out of this. One, you get that warm sun, early spring ice out condition, fish that north end of the lake, and if you catch them there, keep working that over. The second thing is, you know, within 24 hours of ice out, I'm catching them on crankbaits, and I'm not grinding it slow. I'm not just barely moving the thing along. I'm moving it at a fairly decent pace, and the fish are chasing it down. I'm catching these fish halfway back to the boat, maybe a little bit more than halfway back to the boat. They're coming out from underneath it or coming from a little bit distance away to chase it down. They're not lethargic at all. And so, you know, that gives you some ideas that in these early ice out conditions, you don't have to be super slow. You don't have to, especially if you got a nice warm sun that day, it is going to get the fish motivated and energized, and you'll be able to catch some fish out of it. So hopefully you got some interesting tidbits out of this. Appreciate you joining the channel today, and be interested in hearing your tips for ice out fishing, especially in a strip mine lake like this one, which are really deep and clear, and see if you've got any special things you like to do in those lakes as well. So thanks for joining. Let me know if you have any comments or suggestions on what we could do different, and looking forward to a great 22 now that I got some of the fiascos out of the way. Thank you.